um, peritoneal cavity, pleural cavity, there's the lungs, heart. What's this partition that the heart sits in? Did you guys run into that term?
Pericardium?
It's in the pericardium, but this whole middle septum between the lungs is called the mediastinum. Did that
Oh,
term
yeah.
come up?
Yeah, we looked at it.
Okay. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. So there's the lungs, heart, and one thing you'll notice is that often you'll see a big sort of mass of tissue here, just cranial to the heart and running up the neck, and that's the thymus. And it's really variable. The thymus is part of the lymphatic system, and it's where T lymphocytes mature. And basically, in older animals, it regresses. In young animals, it's well developed. So if you've got a relatively young animal, you'll have a giant thymus. If you have an old animal, there will be almost nothing there, just some connective tissue. So, heart. What's the cavity the heart sits in? Pericardial cavity, excellent. So I can put my probe in there with any luck in the pericardial cavity. I actually have to pierce it, which is not. Okay, we'll leave it for now. The cavities on either side, though, those where the lungs are would be pleural cavities. And that membrane that lines the pleural cavities is the pleura. So this is parietal pleura. And then if I touch the lung, we're touching visceral pleura. Okay, just say it. It's good to hear yourself say it. That muscle memory. Okay, so that's the pericardial cavity, pleural cavities, and generally that whole area is the thoracic cavity. And that's separated from the peritoneal cavity by this
Diaphragm.
partition. Remembering this is the diaphragm, exactly. And so we'll come down and we'll look at the abdominal organs and then come back up to look at the head and neck. So this is
Liver.
liver, and you can see this membrane that connects the liver kind of to the diaphragm and the ventral body wall right here, and that would be
Falciform.
the falciform ligament. And I'm going to mention this because someone had asked me about it earlier. You'll see the term coronary ligament, and that's a little confusing because it's hard to figure out exactly what it's supposed to be. It's basically just the place where the visceral peritoneum covering the liver wraps around to the parietal peritoneum on the underside of the diaphragm. And so you can see there's a connection between the diaphragm and the liver that's basically made of a mesentery, and that is the coronary ligament. All right, so there's the liver. The liver has a big sac on the underside that you can see here, if you can get an angle on it, but you probably know what it is if you can't see it. That's the gallbladder. Okay. And as always, if we pull the gut away from the liver, we see there's a mesentery that connects liver to gut, and that would be
Lesser.
Lesser
Lesser.
mention. Yeah.
So you pretty much can just count on that. You pull the liver away from the gut and look for something strange between them. That's lesser omentum. That's a lesser omentum, and if we dissect down in through that, we could find the bile duct running through there and blood vessels and whatnot. So that's connecting then liver to the gut, and particularly to this first big part of the gut that we see running down in this abdominal cavity, and that's stomach. It's a little hard to see the connection there, but right here is the esophagus coming down into the stomach. That's the cardiac region of the stomach. The place where it kind of bulges up above the cardiac region is called the fundus, and then it wraps down into the body and eventually comes down here to the pylorus, the pyloric region of the stomach. And that ends right there, and we get to the duodenum. Dangling off of the stomach, though, is a big organ, this here, and that's the spleen. Okay. And it's sort of torn through a bit here, but there is a mesentery that connects the spleen to the stomach, which would be
Gastric splenic.
gastrosplenic ligament, yes. And that's part of the greater omentum. Remember, the greater omentum is the mesentery, the dorsal mesentery of the stomach. And in mammals, what the greater omentum does, and it's so easy to see on this particular animal, but what the greater omentum does is it comes down off the greater curvature of the stomach and attaches to the spleen, and then comes and wraps around the back side and runs down and connects to the dorsal body wall. The spleen away, come back here, and we're going to follow then down from the stomach, and we get to the duodenum here, the first section of the small intestine. And what organ do we always see associated with duodenum?
Pancreas.
Pancreas. Aha. So lo and behold, if I look right in there, here is, thank you, Christy. Here is pancreas right here.
Nice.
And the cat, the pancreas is a fairly solid organ. Compact, runs along the duodenum here, but also stretches out here into this mesentery, so we can see all along here. That's all pancreas as well. It's very different in the rabbits. We'll see in a second. Okay. And then the small intestine continues along, and there is a mesentery associated with small intestine connecting to the dorsal body wall here. That mesentery would be
Mesentery proper.
the mesentery proper. Yes. I don't like the name, but that's what it's called. Eventually, the small intestine, which, it's reasonably long here. It's all coiled up. It's got a nice mesentery. If we follow it along, though, eventually we get to a point which is basically right here, where the small intestine connects to the large intestine. This last section of small intestine is called the ileum. The first is the duodenum, and somewhere in between is the jejunum. So it goes duodenum, jejunum, ileum. And there's no way to tell those three things apart really clearly at the gross anatomical level. Histologically, if you cut microscopic slides and look at them, you can tell those different regions because they have different glands associated with them, but we can't tell the difference. So if I ever wanted to ask you about ileum, I would stick a pin in the last little bit of small intestine right by the large intestine, and you would know that's got to be ileum. Likewise, duodenum, I would never ask you jejunum because who knows? It's somewhere in the middle of that. Okay.
Punch me in the jejunum.
So this is the large intestine, and in the cat, there's a very tiny little pouch sticking off of this junction of small intestine and large intestine. It's called the cecum. In a rabbit, it is enormous. In the cat, it's just this tiny little thing. And then there's no appendix in the cat. In the rabbit, there's a long appendix hanging off the cecum. Cats do not have them. Cats are carnivores. Carnivores generally do not have an appendix.
So appendix is it for herbivores for digestion?
Yeah, they're associated with herbivores that have a big cecum. So basically, if you've got a
It's the opposite
cecum,
of
you're
what I
keeping
thought it was.
bacteria there, and the appendix has got a lot of lymphoid tissue that helps protect the body from the bacteria that are in the cecum. So then this is the large intestine, or colon, and it's very short in the cat. It basically just runs along, drops down, and out, eventually as the rectum will connect up to the anus and go out. Okay. What else have we not seen? Kidneys, big blobby things on the back wall of the abdominal cavity. There's a lot of fat in there too. We'll see that when we get to the urinary system. So just, there's a kidney in there and there's another one on the other side. They're in slightly different places or levels on the two sides. Let's see. Oh, this is a girl cat. So you might just notice that there's a uterus here. Okay. And this uterus is also associated with fallopian tubes and ovaries. That's the ovary right there. And we'll get to this again when we get to the reproductive system. It's cool to see. Okay, was there anything else in here that people wanted to see that we didn't just look at, that you were looking for? So I'm just doing this off the top of my head. I don't have my little cheat sheet list here. Okay, well, let's come back up then and look at what's going on up in the head and neck region. Okay. So these guys have opened up the oral cavity. So here's the oral cavity. And this is, if you can't see, like, let people know and make sure you can come in, because this is a little smaller, and I know this is something a lot of people haven't really seen much yet. So, but this is the hard palate. You can feel there's something hard there. And if I keep moving back, then it becomes the soft palate. Okay. Here's the tongue on the floor of the mouth. And there's papillae on the tongue, very cool. Filiform papillae and such. If we look back at the back of the soft palate here, you can see that it ends right there. And so I can stick a probe in here above the soft palate, and that space that I'm in is called the nasopharynx. When I'm just below the soft palate in here, I'm in the oropharynx. This is all oral cavity. Where the teeth are, this is oropharynx. And then this area here at the back of the soft palate is called the laryngopharynx. They're just all regions of the pharynx. And one cool thing you can see in here, if I can find it again, you can see it earlier. Right here, in the region of the oropharynx, you see this little fold of tissue, the roof of the mouth, and this little papilla right there, and that's the tonsil, the palatine tonsil. Does it look like a tonsil? Okay. And on this side, it got a little bit cut. There you can see it pretty nicely on that side.
Is the tonsil just like a sensory, just so you know where your food's at?
No,
in your
it's
mouth?
lymphoid tissue. It's basically a protection from nasty organisms in your
Oh,
mouth.
okay.
What would be the choanae then on this?
That's just a part of it.
The choanae are, technically speaking, the opening of the nasal cavity into the nasopharynx, which is back up in here. And what you can't see here is that the nasopharynx, where I've got the probe, goes all the way across the midline. It's just one chamber. But when you get up into the actual nasal cavities, there's a nasal septum, and you have a left and right side. And where that paired nasal cavities open into the single nasopharynx, those are the choanae. Okay. So they're up there. You could cut through here and take a look. Okay, so then if we look here at the back, right, what you'll see is there's basically two tubes running down the neck. And this is one that's going to run down to the stomach, where I've got the probe here. So that would be
Esophagus.
esophagus. And this would be then one running down to the lungs.
Trachea.
Trachea. Yep, exactly. And notice that the esophagus is dorsal to the trachea. So this is a little bit ridiculous, but basically when food comes in, it comes in ventrally into the oral cavity. Air comes in dorsally into the nasal cavity, but then those positions have to switch. And air ends up ventral in the throat region, neck region, and food dorsal. And where that happens is right around here in the laryngopharynx. And basically what happens is there's an opening here into the larynx. And it's guarded by this structure, this little flap. You see that? Mm-hmm. That's, any guesses? Epiglottis. So this is the epiglottis, which is part of the larynx. And that protects the opening into the airway. And it actually seals very nicely with the back of the soft palate here when the animal's mouth is closed. And so they can basically breathe air in, have it come past the epiglottis and down through the larynx, down the trachea. Food then will come into the oral cavity and pass around the epiglottis to either side and extend dorsally into the esophagus. If we kind of open up here the airway, you'll see is there's this section here that's the trachea. And the trachea has cartilaginous rings around it, always in amniotes. There's going to be cartilaginous rings around the trachea. And that basically keeps it from collapsing when the animals are breathing in. Up above that, this is the region of the larynx, and there's a system of cartilages that support the larynx. And you won't be able to see this, but I'll just tell you there's a big shield-shaped one, that's the thyroid cartilage, that's the Adam's apple cartilage, and that's where we saw muscles attaching to. Do you remember the sternothyroid, thyrohyoid? And that's this big cartilage right here. Okay. And then there's a ring-shaped cartilage below that called the cricoid cartilage, and some other little cartilages called the arytenoids. But if we open up the larynx, the main thing I want to show you guys is that, find a good view of it here. Right below the epiglottis here, there's a fold of tissue, okay, running across. And then there's a little groove below it. So can you see this here? It's very small. That fold, then there's a groove, and then another fold. And this top fold is called the false vocal fold, and the bottom or caudal fold is the true vocal fold, the vocal cord. So right there is the vocal cord. And there's one on each side, and those two vocal cords, the left and right, can be put right up against each other. Lisa, did you get it? Are you good enough? Okay. All right. They can be put right up against each other and close off the airway. And that technically is the glottis, where the two vocal folds come together in a mammal. So it looks pretty different from the glottis in a frog, let's say, or a snake. And so that's the control of air going in and out of the airways, those vocal folds. And air going up passes by those vocal folds or cords, and just like you ever like blown up a balloon and kind of stretched it out and let it kind of fart as it's letting air out. It's basically the same thing that's going on. The air going past these stretched vocal cords makes them vibrate and makes a sound. That's how mammals have a voice. Okay. Were there other things that people wanted to see in this general vicinity? No. Do you want to take a look at a rabbit and see how